Where did the Serbs really come from? For centuries, this has been one of the Balkans' biggest mysteries. Some say Serbs descended from ancient Slavs, who first arrived in the region. Others believe their roots go back even further, to the first tribes that lived in the Balkans thousands of years ago. But modern DNA evidence has completely shattered that version of history. So stay with me until the end, because we're about to uncover the hidden truths of Serbian ancestry. Long before anyone called themselves Serbian, this land was home to ancient tribes. The Thracians, Illyrians, and Dacians left their mark here. Their pottery, tools, and bones still lie beneath the earth, telling stories of lives lived thousands of years ago. One amazing discovery came from caves along the Danube River. Inside, scientists found human remains dating back over 7,000 years. When they studied these bones, they realized they belonged to some of Europe's first farmers. These early settlers grew crops, raised animals, and built communities in what we now call Serbia. But it wasn't just farmers. Warrior cultures also lived here. Ancient graves reveal weapons buried with their owners. Bronze swords, spearheads, and shields show that these people weren't just peaceful villagers, but defenders of their land. The Balkans were like a crossroads of the ancient world. To the south lay Greece with its great cities. To the east were other ancient lands. To the west, the coast opened the way to Italy and the Mediterranean Sea. Every empire that rose in the region left its mark. Scientists have found evidence of many different cultures. Pottery styles change from one valley to another. Burial traditions differ between mountains and plains. The land that would become Serbia wasn't home to just one people, but many. This raises an important question. When the Serbs finally appear in historical records centuries later, how much of this older world survived in them? Were the ancient farmers and warriors replaced by newcomers, or did their bloodlines continue quietly into the present? Most history books tell a familiar story. Around the 6th and 7th centuries A.D., large groups of Slavic tribes moved into the Balkans. Based on historical data, Slavic migration towards Balkan Peninsula began in the middle of the 6th century, with more massive migratory waves starting at the beginning of the 7th century. They came from the north and east, traveling down rivers and through forests until they reached the lands of today's Serbia. According to tradition, the Serbs were part of this movement. They were described as Slavic people who settled among the mountains and rivers of the central Balkans. But there's a puzzle. Written sources from the time are unclear. Byzantine writers describe the Slavs arriving in large numbers, but they don't tell us whether these were invasions, peaceful migrations, or something slower and more gradual. Archaeology gives us a clue. When researchers look at settlements from the 6th and 7th centuries, they don't see a complete break with the past. They see continuity. Pottery styles change gradually. Burial practices show both old and new traditions. This raises an even deeper question. If the Serbs were Slavs, how much of their ancestry actually came from those northern migrants? And how much came from the people who had lived in the Balkans for thousands of years before them? Everything changed when scientists began extracting DNA from ancient skeletons. Graves that had been silent for thousands of years suddenly had a story to tell, and what those stories revealed was shocking. In burial sites across Serbia, researchers took DNA from Bronze Age and Iron Age bones. They compared this genetic code to that of modern Serbs living today. What they found was extraordinary continuity. Some family lines had survived unbroken for over 3,000 years. DNA passed down from mothers to children showed clear links between women buried in Roman-era Serbia and women living in Serbian villages today. Not just similar, but in some cases identical. The chain of ancestry was unbroken. On the father's side, the story was more mixed. Many genetic markers common in modern Serbs trace back to Slavic groups that arrived around the 6th century, but others go much deeper into the prehistoric Balkans. Here's the shocking discovery. Slavic migration between the 6th and 11th centuries accounts for 30 to 60% of the ancestry of the populations of the Balkans. This represents one of the largest permanent demographic shifts anywhere in Europe in the early medieval period. But here's what surprised scientists most. Up to half of Serbian genetic markers trace directly to early Balkan farmers and herders. The other half reflects Slavic ancestry, with smaller influences from Celts, Romans, and even nomadic peoples from the steppes. For centuries, people assumed that Slavic migration had replaced the older populations. But DNA tells a different story. Replacement never fully happened. Instead, the Serbs are both Slavic and ancient Balkan, two heritages fused into one people. DNA doesn't just reveal the past of one people. It also shows how groups are connected to their neighbors. And here is where things get even more surprising. When scientists compared Serbian DNA to that of nearby nations, a pattern emerged. The genomes of Croatians and Serbians analyzed speak of a heritage shared in equal measure between Slavic and Mediterranean populations. Serbs are genetically close to other South Slavs, Croats, Bosniaks, Montenegrins, and Bulgarians. That makes sense, but the details are fascinating. While both Serbs and Croats share a strong Slavic foundation, Serbs also carry slightly more markers linked to ancient Balkan populations. Looking east, comparisons with Bulgarians reveal another twist. Bulgarians show genetic influence from Turkic and steppe peoples that once swept across the region. Serbs, on the other hand, carry less of this. Their genetic story is more tightly tied to Slavic and Balkan roots. Even more surprising are the connections with Albanians and Romanians. While these groups speak very different languages, DNA reveals overlaps in ancient Balkan ancestry. In fact, certain family lines in Albanians and Serbs trace back to the same prehistoric tribes. What does this mean? It means that the people of the Balkans, though divided by language, religion, and history, are deeply connected at the genetic level. They share ancient roots that no border or empire could erase. The Balkans were far from a backwater. They were part of one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen. The Romans arrived over 2,000 years ago, building fortresses along the Danube, roads that cut through mountains, and towns that served as centers of trade and culture. But their influence wasn't just in stone and brick. It seeped into the people themselves. Excavations reveal graves that tell a fascinating story. The researchers were surprised to find no evidence of Italian Iron Age ancestry in the Balkan populations during the height of the Roman Empire. Instead, there was an influx of people from Western Anatolia during that period. Through the analysis of ancient DNA, the team identified that during Roman rule of the region, there was a large demographic contribution from the Anatolian Peninsula that left a genetic mark on the Balkan populations. Roman-era skeletons show a surprising variety of origins. Some came from Anatolia, others from the Mediterranean coast, even North Africa. The DNA of these settlers mixed with local populations, creating an early genetic blend that was already complex. What's most remarkable is how these Roman family lines survived. Centuries later, when the Slavs arrived, they didn't completely erase the people who had been here. Instead, some families remained, quietly blending with newcomers. Modern genetic studies suggest that certain lineages in today's Serbian population can be traced back to these Roman-era inhabitants. In other words, women who lived in Roman fortresses may still have living descendants walking the streets of Belgrade today. As the Western Roman Empire collapsed, the Eastern Roman Empire, better known as Byzantium, held its grip over the region. Byzantine influence reshaped cities, religions, and social structures. But DNA shows that this cultural dominance didn't erase ancestry. Even in the Byzantine period, there was continuity. Certain family lines survived, forming an unbroken bridge between the ancient Balkans and the medieval Slavic world. The story doesn't stop with the Romans and Byzantines. Long before the Slavs, the Balkans were touched by another people, the Celts. Known for their sweeping migrations across Europe, the Celts arrived in the Balkans around 300 to 400 BC. Scientists have uncovered Celtic treasures across Serbia, bronze jewelry, decorated swords, and even coins with Celtic writing. In the Central Plains, graves show warriors buried with their weapons in a distinct Celtic style. What makes this discovery fascinating is that the Celts were never a permanent ruling force in Serbia. Unlike the Romans, they didn't build lasting cities or impose empires. Instead, they were passing through, moving in and out, blending with local populations. Yet their genetic and cultural marks survived. Fast forward many centuries, the Balkans became part of another vast empire, the Ottoman Empire. For over 400 years, the Ottomans ruled Serbia, shaping politics, religion, and society. Yet when we look at DNA, the genetic impact of the Ottomans is surprisingly modest. Modern studies suggest that while there is some Middle Eastern influence, it's limited and region-specific. Unlike the Romans or Slavs, the Ottomans didn't settle in large numbers to replace the local population. Still, the Ottoman period left subtle fingerprints. Certain regions show a slightly higher presence of genes associated with Anatolian and Middle Eastern populations. These tiny traces are like historical bookmarks, reminders of a time when the Balkans were part of a vast multicultural empire. The genetic legacy of the Ottoman period also highlights the resilience of local populations. Despite invasions, wars, and political shifts, the backbone of Serbian ancestry endured. I hope you enjoyed this video. Do like and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this.